Welcome to this journey where we dialogue with thought and heart leaders to share their reflections on human condition and how to improve them.
I had a very interesting childhood in several ways. First of all, I was the only child. So that was, I got a lot of attention from my parents as well as from other relatives. My father's grandfather was from Surat. He was a petty grocer. That's why out of the blue, 2 years later, he gets a letter from this Unitarian man, I forgot his name, saying that, look, we are prepared to give you a scholarship to study at Berkeley. Wow. Comparative religion. It's the mahal in which I grew up, where you had this, and then my father was a nationalist, he was in the freedom movement, he went to jail several times, got beaten up, lathi charge and all that. So he had this kind of a very tolerant family, very independent, everybody was doing his own thing and yet very close-knit, and ranging all the way from communism to capitalism to markets, nationalism to whatever else. Education became terribly important because his daughters had to be married. So my one aunt went to, after her MBBS, she went to Vienna to study higher gynecology. Another aunt went to the United States to study education and sociology. The one I talked to you, the communist one.
Yes.
And one died early, so I don't remember what she did. And there was another one who also did MA or something. Anyway, so education became very important, I'm just telling you this because it has shaped me in some ways.
Absolutely.
So and then on my mother's side, we also had a remarkable family. I don't know whether you've heard of K.M. Munshi.
Kanhaiyalal Munshi.
Now, Kanhaiyalal Munshi was my mother's father. And Leelavati Munshi was my grandmother. I was not keeping too well. I did fairly well at college. And I wanted to go and study in London School of Economics. This was very interested in economics. But my health was not very good. I had a lot of allergy problems and so on. And British English climate is not very congenial. So I decided to see. So I became a chartered accountant. After that, I thought that I looked at my life and said, I don't want to spend the rest of my life auditing books of accounts and filing tax returns and so on. I found during my articles, when I went to audit companies, I found the management issues very interesting. You get the accounts, but behind the accounts are decisions. And I would probe them, why did you take this decision? Why did you do this? And that whetted my appetite to understand management much more. So I said, okay, what the hell? Let me go to Wharton for an MBA, then I'll come back and practice as a chartered accountant, but with management consultancy as a plank. So I went to Wharton, the University of Pennsylvania. Right. And I was blown. The education system was so rich. The whole thing was different. In Sydenham College where I went, we had big classes, 80, 90 kids in a class, and there would be good lecturers, good. Sydenham was a very good college. So we had some very good teachers, professors. But it was very one-way sort of teaching. You didn't have much choice. Here was choice. I could take any course. I took courses in psychology, in regional science. I had not even heard the name. But, it was econometrics, about which I knew very little. But I could take the financial management by one of the world's leaders there, Fried something.
Friedman? Not Friedman.
Not Milton. But some very eminent friend, ErwinFriend, F-R-I-E-N, ErwinFriend. So I was thrilled with the educational system there, and it whetted my appetite to learn more. And then I applied for FordFoundation fellowship. Then I was happy to be one of the 20 selected across the country for a doctoral fellowship. I could go to any school of my choice for PhD. At that time, I had choice of Harvard and Columbia and UCLA and Berkeley and so on. But Almarin Phillips, who taught me industrial economics, market structure, behavioral economics at that time, was very exciting, very interesting. He said, no, don't go to Harvard, you go to Carnegie, because you have two of the world's leading organization theorists there, since if you're interested in organization theory. HerbertSimon was there, who later got the Nobel Prize. Richard Syart and James March and so on, those extremely bright people who founded organization theory. So I went to Carnegie Tech. At that time it was Carnegie Tech, Carnegie Institute of Technology. It later became Carnegie Mellon University. And I did my PhD there under Dick Syart, who was the dean of the school, and then later became the president of the university. And it was a great time, extremely interesting, fascinating. I took a course on with Simon on cognitive psychology. Now, Simon was a public administration man who got his Nobel Prize for economics and has made major contributions in psychology.
Amazing.
So you are in a place where versatility of the mind is, one could talk to Simon as I'm talking to you. With coffee time, you would sit together and chat, and that kind of thing you cannot imagine in this country, except in maybe Shantiniketan or somewhere there. But that kind of, maybe at IIMA, sometimes.
Very stimulating environment.
Yeah, extremely stimulating. It is really cognitively extremely
enriching,
very stimulating. And therefore, the interdisciplinariness which has come into me stems from there. The desire and the ability to see things from many different perspectives. So when I look at a phenomenon, I just don't see it as management person. I see it from an economic angle, social angle, psychological angle, anthropological angle, and so on.
Amazing.
And even spiritual angle.
Correct.
So that kind of spirituality was not in vogue there, but this was part of my back home heritage.
Yeah.
So that was what shaped me, and then I had to decide where to go. I had offers from good American schools, but my wife and I were not very enamored of living in America. We found gun violence today is bad. It was bad then, but it was, of course, much worse now. But somehow we had been for 4 or 5 years in the States, and we felt that this is not a sufficiently civilized place.
I see. What were the markers you were looking at that time?
Well, no, it's the feel of it, the interpersonal relationships, the violence, the aggression in the air, the materialism,
We're talking about the 70s.
I'm talking about the
60s.
60s. 69, I went to McGill, Montreal. 69 to 75. So we chose Canada. And I must say we found Canada much better as a place. Montreal was a lovely city, multicultural. So we had many friends, French Canadian as well as English Canadian, also many Indians. So it was great fun. My wife was a singer and a writer, so that was something additional. And we had a great time there. Then came sabbatical. And the IIMA directors, first RaviMatthai and then later on Paul, both had been visiting the States in search of faculty.
Right.
And they had been meeting me and said, well, Pradip, why don't you come back? So I said, okay, my sabbatical is coming, I'll come and spend a year at IIMA. Then I felt that 1 year would not be enough to, having lived for 10 years in North America, to adjust life here. So I requested McGill for 2-year leave. And they agreed to give me full pay, but at half pay for the 3 years. halfway this year, halfway the next year. And I told them that I probably will not come back. But nonetheless, they were gracious enough. This is the goodness of Canadian institution, that knowing that I would not be coming back, still may not be coming back, they still were very gracious. So came back to India, and lo and behold, the emergency. And we were appalled because, we had for 10 years, we were a very different environment, and suddenly you had censorship and all the rest. And shortages. The shortages are such amazing, one day salt would not be available in the marketplace. Cars were out of the question, telephone was out of the question, long queues.
Correct.
Very much in organization theories, then I became very interested in Indian styles of management. I spent first 2 years, in visiting various places in India to meet indigenous business houses, Surat and Baroda and Mumbai and Ahmedabad and Pune and so on, to understand better what is so special about Indian management. Because when you are in the West, you have a certain disdain, and this Indian management is all crap, it's all dishonest fellows and making money and all that. But I had, at the end, a very healthy respect for some of the more innovative practices that.
Can you share
Indian
some of them that you followed?
Yes, the PartaSystem, for example, which the Birlas had developed, which comes from their trading background in Rajasthan, goes back. See, the traders had to know at the end of the day what their profit was.
Like creating a balance sheet every day.
Every day.
Yeah.
Now that system they carried out in industry.
Yeah.
The major innovation. So every day in the morning, the Birla in charge of any group of companies would get in code a message, telegraphic, I don't know how they, or telephone or something, where you have +2, -3, plus some 8 or 10 different variables on which the numbers would be indicated. The day's profit, the day's production variance, the day's sales variance, there is cash variance. All of these things were every day for 300 companies. Can you imagine the power of that system when computer was not involved, not at all there? Is that an amazing feat?
Yeah.
It's an amazing feat to be able to use a trading tool to apply it so imaginatively to industry. The other interesting thing I found was their referral system.
Okay.
It was that time a sort of a black market economy,
Yeah.
and a lot of black transactions were there. The permit license Raj was there, and there was always this perennial problem of how to keep cash safely.
Yes.
So you had to have a very, very reliable person. Obviously, the Birlas could not keep track of the cash. Running 300 companies, impossible to.
Decentralized.
Well, not really decentralized, but in terms of keeping track of where the money is
Yes.
and how to keep it safe, a major problem. So how would you solve it? So Ghanshyam Das Birla was the patriarch of the Birla family. Every day would have his darbar in the morning,
Yeah.
chai. And he would say, in Grasim we need a fellow to keep track of cash. And the fellows who attended the tea part thing, the brokers and adatiyas and various those kinds of people who were attached to the Birlas. So they in turn would contact several of their cronies, and within a day or two, 300-400 people would be contacted about who is a very suitable person for the Birlas for Grasim.
Amazing.
And within a week the man would be there.
Okay.
Now imagine this for not one company but
Almost all the appointments we did.
Yeah. But particularly the sensitive ones.
Yeah.
For the cash management.
Purchases
Keys
and
to
cash.
keep it, yeah.
These two are key things. And third was public, what we euphemistically call public relations.
Correct.
Yes.
Right? So three were the areas where you needed to have
Strong.
very, very reliable
Reliable
person
people.
and very resourceful person also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And they were able to get these people through this means. The third thing was very interesting was that among Gujarati and Marwari business houses at that time, the young sons were sent in their vacation periods to the factories. So by the time they were 18, they knew everything about the business. And then typically they would be given a small business to start with, prove themselves there, and they would be given a little bigger business.
Correct.
And then there would be a group of companies and so on, until of course they reach the top.
Right.
So that grooming system was there. The fourth interesting thing I found was, this was not my study, MiltonSinger's study. MiltonSinger was a sociologist, and he had come to India to study business houses in the south. And he found that these fellows were very chuste the. These very
Strict,
stringent,
disciplinary.
Money-minded.
very money-minded
Money-minded.
in businesses.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he concluded that these fellows were some SOBs.
Yeah.
He said, no, but as a sociologist, I must go to their homes and find out what they live like. And when he went home, he found that these were very simple people. They lived in a very simple lifestyle. They didn't have any ostentatious thing. They had, of course, car and bungalow and all that, but not palatial things and all that. So he was very curious, and he asked them, I find that you're very strict about money at business, but you live in such a frugal style. What do you do with all that money? You give it away.
I see.
We build temples, and we build academic institutions and so on. So our dharma is to make money. This literally, our dharma is to make money. But our dharma is not to keep it.
Okay.
Our dharma is to use it properly. So we make money, but then we use it properly.
Public good, social good.
Yeah, broadly. Back to IIMA, that was my...
When you came back, emergency.
Came back 1975.
Yeah.
Came back. 77, the emergency was lifted. And then we got a house on campus, so some of the pollution problems disappeared and life became much smoother. And our health improved, of course, and unfortunately my father passed away during that time. My mother had passed away in 1961, but my father passed away in 1977 at my place while I was teaching at IIMA. So when I came home, he was no more. Anyway, that was the painful part, but otherwise, by and large, life got settled down. IIMA was a very good experience, very rich experience. It was very much like an American school, in the sense there was a very free atmosphere. Students and faculty interacted a great deal. Students used to come over to our place very often, and we would eat or have tea together or talk together, and vice versa. It was nice. You would drop in some dorm and have a chat. Also, in terms of academia, a large number of faculty at IIMA were people who had studied in the United States or abroad. So there was this compatibility in terms of exposure. And they all had come back because they wanted to come back. They need not have come back, but they wanted to come back. So there was this notion that somehow at IIMA we must do something which makes IIMA useful to India. This concern was there. And so we, meanwhile I had started teaching a course on creativity in Canada. That was also an accident.
That is a subject.
That was an accident. I was preparing for my doctoral qualifiers at Carnegie. And one day, late at night, 12:30 or 12, I was very tired and was going home, and I chanced to look at the stacks and saw a book called Creativity and Intelligence. And I picked it up, and that I would fall asleep reading it. And that was the idea. I went home and I read through the night because it was so fascinating. It opened up the entire phenomenon of creativity. Previously, I had not thought of creativity as anything very different from intelligence. I thought very intelligent people are also very creative. But the book very clearly showed through research on gifted children, where the average IQ of that school was 130. You can imagine how bright those kids were. They compared two groups of kids. One group high on creativity as measured, but not as high on IQ. And they are high on IQ, but not as high on creativity. So these two kind of slightly polarized groups, and then they studied them intensively. They gave them Rorschach tests and they interviewed them. They gave them paper and pencil tests. They even went to their homes to interview parents and looked around what kind of magazines the parents would have, how they spend their weekends or their vacation periods, what kind of aspirations the children had, and so on. And they found startling differences. The creative children were different. Their aspirations were different. The way they perceived reality was different. And that made me fascinated with creativity. I had taken no course on creativity, but when I started teaching at McGill, I thought that I would learn more by teaching a course on creativity. So I offered a course on creativity. It was a fairly popular course, and students took it. Then when I came back to IIMA, I continued teaching that course, and it continued to be fairly popular here. In the meanwhile, I did a fair amount of research also on creativity and published 3 or 4 books.
I have a curiosity. At that point in time, and how would you define the fundamental difference between the two? Because as you said that...
The difference is, look, creativity is also part of intelligence.
Right.
But intelligence as we understand normally is IQ, intelligence quotient. And the major difference is that in IQ testing, there's one right answer, which you logically derive. In creativity, beyond logic, you also go. How many uses of this red book? It's not a logical answer. There's no logical answer.
Correct.
It's your imagination.
Correct.
You can think of 50 different uses of this book.
Yes.
Correct.
As a weight, as color, as to frighten somebody at night, whatever. You can think of various things. As a weapon,
Yes.
so many different things. So that is the basic difference, divergent thinking and convergent thinking. There's again a very interesting history to this. In 1950, there was a paper read by the president of the American Psychological Association, JPGuilford. Professor JPGuilford was the professor. Until that time, creativity was taboo for social psychologists. Mysticism, God's inspiration,
Creationism,
all that sort of, that somehow God speaks to you or something happens mysterious. So this mysteriousism was there, and this man demonstrated, no, these are two basically different ways of thinking. What he called divergent thinking and convergent thinking, and he had tests and so on, and fairly hard-nosed research. He presented the paper, and then there was a flood of research. So when I wrote my first book in 1984, by that time about 2,000 pieces of research had been done on creativity. So it has been a very, very prolific area for research, because certainly then you began to ask, what are creativity? It's a cognitive thing, it's also an emotional thing, it's also an attitudinal thing, it's a personality thing, it's a social psychological thing, it's a social thing, a sociological dimension to it. Multifactor. So just as IQ has become a very significant area of research and is related to so many different things, similarly creativity too has become a very interesting research. And then it has had a major impact on education, because till then education was very much convergent thinking. The teacher knew best what was to be taught, and the teacher told the class, and the class learned it and regurgitated it. When creativity came along, then people realized that, look, there's another dimension to thinking, and we must encourage children to think on their own, to come up with their own solutions, potential ways of looking at things, use their imagination, which is abundant in childhood but somehow gets cramped over time. So this was therefore a major impact on education. And looking at historically, my own feeling is that in India, it's not that we are not a creative people, but our creativity is very circumscribed. Somewhere along the line we lost the plot. If you go back to the Upanishads, the questioning habit is strong. Inquiry. Why? Nachiketa asking Yama, what is this? In fact, he was thrown out by his father because of that. Yeah. So questioning was very important at that time. Somewhere along the line we forgot to question. We only knew answers, and we were told those answers by Shastras. So these Shastras have been a very dampening factor in our upbringing over the centuries. So that curiosity of finding out, knowing, tinkering with what you know, trying out things, working with it, innovating, coming up with new innovations. So if we had innovations, they were by chance. But if you look at Chinese innovations and Indian innovations, both comparable societies in many ways, the Chinese are far ahead of us. Not only today, but over the last 2,000-3,000 years. Because for some reason, their tinkering was permitted. You could tinker with things. You had Confucian ethics is very permissive. It is fairly strong, but it is also quite accommodative. And Buddhism also is not a fanatical religion at all. It's very. Buddha himself was a questioner.
Would you feel that this duty boundness, the adherence culture, was also
adherence culture in the when it's overplayed?
Yeah.
When you stop thinking of alternatives because your sense of duty is so strong that you have no option but to do that,
right,
then that certainly comes in the way of creativity.
But is it because we have right from childhood, we try to inculcate a sense of confirmation
Yes.
as to what is happening in and around within the family, outside the family?
You are absolutely right that conformity had a social
Yes.
value.
It
It restricted thought, but it also facilitated harmony.
Yes,
If everybody did his dharma, then there would be much less conflict.
correct.
Now that became the basis of that conformity,
Yes.
but it destroyed our creativity.
True, true.
So you have somewhere to strike a balance. That's why you want to have a higher ethical consciousness where you do what is right. What your conscience tells is right, not what somebody else tells is right.
Correct.
Actually, when you go back to Mahabharat, it was Arjun's right conscience. He said, why should I fight?
Exactly.
Should I kill my grandfather? Bhishma, after all, was practically a grandfather.
Yes.
Should I kill him? If Pandu was opposed to me, should I kill him? For what? Is power that critically important? And Krishna's answer was, no, that's your duty.
Yeah.
You're a Kshatriya, therefore you must fight. Even if you have to kill your father, you must fight. Now this has had its own deleterious effects.
True.
And then came the Bhakti movement, which submerged critical intelligence. Devotion to the point where you don't ask tough questions.
Gyan Yoga is in a way.
So no, it's not. You need bhakti. You need, but
You need a
praman
balance. You need to.
mein hona chahiye.
Sir, I have one curiosity question.
Yeah.
Is it because India, which was a hierarchical society, confirmation was a major tool to exercise
Absolutely,
power?
you are right. It was really a power arrangement
Yes,
to keep power in the higher castes.
that's right.
Absolutely.
And that's why they restricted people's thought process, by which they allowed them to go ahead with blinkers.
Absolutely.
And as you rightly said, those blinkers came in different form and format. Therefore, there was more and more confirmation
Absolutely.
and less of divergent thinking.
Divergent thinking.
So creativity was a major casualty.
Major casualty of this entire process.
Yes.
And we paid a price.
Yes,
We paid a price in terms of being overrun by any fellow who happened to come across the mountains to invade us, and we got,
correct.
in spite of our numbers, we vastly larger armies, and yet we got defeated because we didn't have the military technology. We didn't have the discipline. Because we didn't ask the right questions. So typically you would have an army of 100,000, but 10,000 would be trained. The rest would be drawn from villages. Chalo, give them a sword or a bala or something and you fight. Now untrained people fighting against, so 9,000 of the Babur, 9 or 10,000 Babur defeated Rana Sangha
Correct.
with 100,000 troops.
Correct.
How? How is it possible? You have to ask those tough questions. Why is it that we have been defeated again and again and again, in spite of our numbers and in spite of our wealth?
Yes,
I
that's
have a
true.
curiosity, sir. And I'm sure you would have thought about this, so I want to understand from you. When we say that there is this aspect of creativity and intelligence as a skill.
IQ, right.
IQ.
Yeah.
You're also taking into account that different people are differently placed in terms of disposition. Where do you stand on this whole debate that is happening across the world, the gene versus cultural underpinnings of the spark of creativity and intelligence being brought about?
Look, truth is there in genes, truth is there in culture, truth is there in individuality. All three are there. In the same culture, you will find huge differences in creativity.
Correct.
The same family, you will find differences. In the same twins, you will find.
Also shown that.
So it is not as if it's something that is, but genetic factor is there. Francis Galton's study showed that he did a study of eminence in 19th century, 18th century Britain, and he found that the eminence of the son was more strongly correlated with that of the father than the grandson of the great grandson. That suggested a genetic factor. So there is no doubt there is a genetic factor, but it's not the only factor.
Correct.
You know, when you get to determinism, that's where the problem arises. So this is the only one right thing. It's a multi-factor thing. Genes have a causative factor. So is culture, but so is individuality. So is the environment in which you, exposure you get, your individual groups that you are a member of, community you are a member of, your family, your opportunities in life. You're born poor, you're going to be disadvantaged as compared to being born like you and me.
Right.
So of course it will be. So there are multiple factors.
Dr. Edward de Bono, I think he's done a lot of work, and he's also
a lot of popularizing.
He's actually popularized.
No research popularizing.
He probably may not have done research, but I have read a lot of his books. Where he actually says that person can learn to become creative.
I mean, of course.
Yes, so it is also a trait that cannot be that can be developed.
Of course.
And
that's the thrust of my books.
Absolutely.
I've got a model of creative achievement, which says there is a function of creative intelligence, creative environment, creative personality, creative process, and creative technology. And if you orchestrate all of these,
fine-tune in some way.
Yeah, if you in a synchronized manner improve on all these, then creativity can double or triple very quickly.
Yes. Great. And I think that's
he only talks of the thinking part of it.
Yes.
But I have a little broader canvas because I talk about 6 different kinds of creativity.
Correct.
And I think you're laying emphasis on structure and skills both. You're saying the political, economic, social systems also.
They also, of course,
have to come around and facilitate.
You have to facilitate that.
Yeah.
Your family life has to facilitate that.
Correct.
Your economic condition has to facilitate that. Your teaching has to facilitate that. And there is, of course, always the individual factor.
Correct. Which actually is a good segue to your wonderful book, sir. If I remember listening to one of your talk, where you open up the whole, discourse there by saying that this body of work, is a function of
both grief and
outcome of grief and elation. Can you expand on that, sir?
Yes, I am elated by the enormous progress mankind has made in every sphere of life. And in a sense, this is the most exciting time in history. In the last 100 or 200 years, so much has been accomplished. So many frontiers have been opened up. And they will continue to be opened up. We have created an ecosystem which is far more open than it ever was earlier, which was far more inclusive than it ever was earlier. So that is a positive part, that you've got this enormous humanity of 7 billion people. All of them can contribute to human progress in their diverse ways and diverse niches. But at the same time, you've got 3 major institutions of society that are necessary and yet cause a lot of difficulties. One is the market economy, because it's based on greed, but you need it because it works for efficiency, innovation, productivity and so on, quality, etc., diversity of products, offerings and so on. The other is democracy, which is also vital because it gives us freedoms and we can flower in those freedoms. but it is also based on greed for power.
True.
And then we have in India and elsewhere a developmental state which harnesses huge amounts of resources into developmental tasks without implementation capacity. So there are huge leakages, a lot of corruption. So you got these three realities which indispensable though these three institutions are, they are also the cause of our grief. So a lot of violence you see, a lot of discord you see is because of greed. Greed for power, greed for money, selfishness,
Status.
which comes, and capacity to siphon off funds because of corruption and so on and so forth. So now our challenge therefore as a civilization is how do you retain a market economy, a competitive market economy. You retain democracy, a healthy functioning democracy. You retain a developmental state which works with the people to raise the living standards of people. Without the corruption, the nepotism, the violence, and all the other ills that we see.
So I have a.
That is what the challenge is.
Yeah. So I think when you're talking about the elation and the progress of humanity in the last 200 years, I think you're clearly standing with Pinker there when he's quoting in his book Enlightenment Now, and he's giving statistics about infant mortalities, poverty, health, upgradation, education. A lot of people being brought out of the poverty index.
Not only that, but freeing up of the mind.
Of the people.
Of the
yes.
mind.
Okay.
That is a major change. You know? So women, for example, empowerment, not just in the physical terms, longevity, yes, but also when you realize that 50% of humanity was not allowed to think,
Yes.
and now can think.
Suffrage was not there.
Suffrage was not there. Now women gradually coming to the fore.
Right.
Children are getting much more informed education. Access to information is so enormous now.
True.
Right.
So those are very positive factors.
Right.
But at the same time, you also have the negatives, that your mobile phone and your internet can be used for pornography and for chit chat and waste of time.
Yeah, cat videos.
Yeah,
But that's fun sometimes.
it's fun, but praman mein.
Praman.
Correct. So, and then you're also standing with Adam Smith when he talks about that the baker, the brewer, and the butcher do not participate in the economy for serving, but serving their own self.
But Adam Smith also said, no, that a society in which the human good is not considered is not a good society.
And why is that forgotten, sir, amongst the
No,
lineage?
because you need a market economy, you need competition, there's no doubt that a competitive economy is better than a monopolistic economy.
Totally, sir.
Right?
Totally.
So there is no doubt about that. But at the same time, the effort has been over the last 100 years to rein in that viciousness that is created by a greed for money.
Where the state plays the role.
The state plays a role, civil society plays a role, media plays a role, education plays a role.
Sorry, you come.
No, I'm just saying that the checks and balances have emerged.
Correct.
They're not perfect, but we are trying to come to grips with both a rampant capitalism and a rampant democracy and a rampant developmental state, all three of which are necessary but need to be molded in a way that makes for human good.
I was listening to an interesting conversation where Francis Fukuyama, who's one of the leading public intellectual, so recently when the Syrian crisis broke, and then there was this congregation of some scholars looking at civil unrest and what leads to it. So Francis Fukuyama presented a paper out there where he studied medieval England, and he came to a conclusion that from 11th century till about 18th century, every 50 years England had had a civil unrest. But from the 18th century onwards till date, there have been not a single instance of a major civil unrest in the country.
In England.
In England is what he's citing in his own assessment of civil unrest. But the point that he's trying to make is a large part
So
of
I can see fairly large 19th century labor militancy in Britain.
as a part of
Then the entire Irish rebellion
correct.
was a huge
unrest. Sort of. The point he's trying to
anyway, let's what's the point?
Yeah, the point he's trying to make is the reason why this is happening is because there is a normative. It's not because of anything else, but the normative acceptance that we would be governed by law and we would respect the law. And he believes that that takes time in a culture. This whole idea of giving up, while you have given up the individual towards the collective in terms of the governance, but it takes a long time to adhere to the law. Where do you see something there that you can speak to?
I think unconsciously it has been there throughout history. What the Dharma was law in another form, where people tried to adhere to law, but law was not given politically, it was given by the priest class.
Correct. Mechanism was different.
The mechanism was there.
Conveyed to the
So I don't think a society has existed without mechanisms for compliance. Okay, today we are, the compliance mechanisms are political, bureaucratic and so on, but normative compliance has been there in China, in Japan, in
Always.
Christianity, in Islam. So I'm not too sure about this compliance bit.
Can I qualify
But
that
the
statement?
kind of compliance, he may be right about that.
And another point, prior to that, there was no nationhood. The times that we're talking about are smaller societies, not scaled up to the level of millions and billions of people. So his point was, when it is adopted at the level of nation, as an idea, as an imaginative structure, it's then that it begins to, because when you're a smaller society, governing that society is slightly different than governing a whole kind of a huge nation. So I think he's speaking to that, perhaps.
But we have at least one example, the United States, which is a melting pot of large number of communities, from Africa to Asia and of course Europe. And they have managed to hold it together for 200, 300 years. I don't know enough about this thesis to be sure, to be able to make a response. I can think of small countries with a lot of unrest, like in Africa, for example. There are these tribal unrest is going on in several states, small countries. And I can think of large countries where there is unrest also. And I can think of peacefulness in large countries and peacefulness in small countries. So I'm not too sure. You may have, if you have this 2x2 matrix, you may have some small countries with a lot of unrest, but also some large countries with a lot of unrest.
So which is not,
but the reasons may be different.
Yeah, which perhaps then segues to this whole thing called the politics of resentment. The basic idea being that you talk to any individual on the street and you ask them whether you're underappreciated, do you think things are unfair? And the answer is going to be hands down yes. The thing is, how do you deal?
But why? I think this is the critical question.
Okay.
That's where I come back to this whole issue of people being hyped up by opportunity, of power and money, and so you're constantly being discontented. If you are making more money than I am also from IIM and you're also from IIM, and you're making twice as much money. I may be making 5 lakhs a month, but you're making 10 lakhs a month, and I would feel discontented.
Yes.
Although my 5 lakhs is
much greater than the other.
500 times that of the average Indian.
Correct.
Okay, so this is an institutionalized discontent that the market economy breeds into the society, and I think it's true equally of democracy. There's an institutionalized
power concentration,
threat to power, and hunger for power. Those in power are fearful of losing power.
Right.
And those who don't have power want to grab power because of the anxiety, insecurity of the power itself is something which you feel secure with. Again, if you go to Maslow, you are stuck at that level of human development.
Yes.
And I think the whole point is, can we go beyond it? So that these anxieties which trouble America right now and troubling France right now and may trouble India sometime.
I think it's troubling us
also,
a lot.
yes. Yeah. It's not erupted so much, but it's there. That it's, we can aspire but yet not be totally discontented. There's a difference between aspiring, which comes closer to self-actualization, and being discontented because somebody has more of it and we don't have.
Right.
And now this more or less is because of a competitive market system and a competitive political system. So competition is very good, very desirable, but we have to, through education and through other processes, ensure that human beings grow up to have a holistic conception of life. That yes, you compete to excel. Karmanyavadi karasthi mahaleshu kada, you make the effort. You may or may not get, but you should make the effort because the effort itself is fun. It is your self-actualization. It's your purusharth. If we can get that concept in, then perhaps all this anxiety which is troubling so many of us would be less. It will never go away because human beings are a aspiring, wanting species. That's why we are where we are.
That's why the progress is there.
That's why the progress is there. Right from 100,000 BC, we have got because people were restless. That restlessness is innate to our species, and it's a good thing also because it innovation, advancement in science, technology, arts, and so on. But the side effects are there, and those side effects have to be looked at carefully.
In a way, you saying something?
No, okay. I just have a small extension to this. These are inherent, and this will remain. The fact that it will be there, is there any way it can be moderated, or is there any way some other values can be inculcated by which this so-called animal instincts don't drive the human beings and society at large?
Yeah.
Can something be done by which it becomes a preventive measure that it doesn't?
It's a very good question. I don't think I have the full answer, but I can attempt.
Yep.
I think human beings are also altruistic by nature.
Yes.
Innate. Because without that, family life would be impossible.
Correct.
I mean, that sniveling child, why the hell would you care for it? It's such a bother, such a nuisance. But you care for it.
Yes.
And you're willing to give your life for it.
Yes.
For your family, for your nation, and so on. So there is within us a strong altruistic instinct. I think the question we need to pose is, just as we excite the animal spirits,
Yes.
can we also excite the altruistic spirit?
Very good.
That I see a challenge. Can we do that? And you can do that through education, through upbringing, through creating a norm where you excel, but you don't excel to kill somebody.
Correct.
You excel because excellence is good, but you excel because you want to make a contribution. Now
Correct.
this making a contribution is a concept that if you can instill, so that what you do is not just for yourself,
Right.
but you're doing it for something larger.
Right.
Now that can perhaps help.
In a way, I think you're also, through that statement and philosophically, I think you're siding with Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who believed that inherently we are good as people, as versus Hobbes, who was saying we were savage. So
I don't think I'm saying inherently we are good. We are inherently good and bad.
Okay,
Both exist. Both exist.
But you're saying that
there is a beast within us, and there is also God within us.
Yin and yang,
And what we bring,
both exist, and there is a balance of.
But it's a question of what are you exciting?
Absolutely.
Right.
What are you inculcating? What are you promoting?
Correct.
Right.
That is what culture tries to do or should do. That is the role of culture.
Should.
What is it that it tries to do to bang the animal spirits enough so you need to have them to make progress, but not go too far out.
It should not be in the. Yeah, sorry, you can complete that.
The other part that I was trying to absorb is you mentioned that family could not be brought about without having the altruistic instincts. But then from an evolutionary, and I think it maps onto this, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, the selfish gene hypothesis from Dawkins and an extension of it in terms of extended phenotypes in behavior, or rather extended phenotypes and behaviors, would lend itself for such a kind of thing where you are, because the genes, the replicators, are looking for vehicles, it becomes mandatory for the person to take care of the child. How would you respond to
First of all, the gene is not conscious.
Okay.
We are reifying,
Okay.
to use a philosophical term, we are reifying the gene. Gene is not conscious, gene is doing its own chemical thing.
So you're laying
But it is the fellow, the scientist, who is imputing that the gene, it is to replicate his gene, the lion mates with the lioness. Oh, the lion is doing his own thing.
Yeah.
It happens that it creates pups,
Yeah.
what are they called?
So you're
Cubs.
saying a higher order agency is imparted to a lower order?
There is certainly instinct is there, there is nature is there.
Right.
But this idea that somehow genes govern everything is again one of those universalized solutions to everything.
Not a plural one, as you said.
Yeah, it's multi-world. We live in a multi-factor world
Yeah.
in which one factor I recognize, yes, it is there.
Right.
Of course, the gene is a factor, but it's not necessarily the only determining factor.
Right.
It's a very plausible, the appeal of Marxism or Freud or this Dawkins is a plausibility. It looks sounds that it explains everything, but it explains very little.
Yes.
Or it explains part of
reality.
scenario.
But that the scientific mind would say under what circumstances
Yes.
does the gene play a part?
Yes.
Under what circumstances culture plays a part? Under what circumstances the individual plays a part, and so on. Contingency kind of situational, contextual analysis, rather than trying to explain everything in terms of either class conflict or this gene thing,
Right.
or Freudian subconscious or whatever.
Right.
In fact, behavior of an individual would largely depend on nature as well as nurture.
Nature, nurture, and individuality.
Environment
And individuality.
Yes.
All three.